I would like to see that as a global harmonization that recognizes that AI is not technology to be taken lightly.
Yeah.
And likewise, it isn't one where a siloed approach in which we are effectively being protectionist is going to work, because it won't. And then exited and sold one. So I can begin to say with some degree of authority what doesn't work for tech founders on that journey. What absolutely doesn't work is two things. One is,
so Raoul, you want to explain to the viewers what you do? How did you become a lawyer who specialized in tech, which is very unusual?
question. So what do I do? I mean, I'm sort of best known in the UK as one of the country's leading lawyers for digital media. So most of my clients are people who will either make, distribute, or monetize content, and that's written word, music, film, and TV. So I tend to be the digital side of those industries. So incumbents who own a lot of IP and content will talk to me about adopting new technology, and vendors who have made new technology and want to sell to that kind of institution will come to me and say, hey, look, I'm either building or have built a particular product. Help me to get it developed. Help me to be compliant. Help me to close deals with major customers. So that's what I do. I mean, ironically, so how did you become a tech lawyer? The answer is completely by accident. So
As usual.
I got right. So I got into law. I mean, I think as everybody does, thinking that I wanted to do Rumpole at the Bailey. I wanted to be a barrister. I wanted to wear a wig and a gown. I was going to defend the innocent. I was going to do huge trials at the Old Bailey. That's what I thought my life was going to be. And it didn't work out like that. So I trained at one of the UK's leading criminal defence firms. And at the end of my training, they said, hey, you've done really well. And we think that your job is in clinical negligence, which is all about claims against the NHS. And that's really depressing work, because the entire job is people with life-changing injuries every day. And I confess, I couldn't do it. It wasn't for me. I didn't have the sensitivity. I just didn't love the work. I sort of came home miserable, and I was terrified of going to doctors with even the most minor thing. So I said, I've got to get out of here, and started applying jobs. Again, at other criminal defence firms. I got offered a job at a criminal defence firm and realised I needed a reference. So there I was thinking, who will I write to? This is my current employer. Get my second reference. And I went for a walk on Hampstead Heath, and I bumped into a guy who I had known as a sort of partner in technology during my training. He had moved on. I said, God, what a coincidence to see you. There I was thinking about people who might be a reference. Would you write a few kind words? And he said, well, I'll tell you what, we always got on, and my associate has just quit. So do you want a job as a technology lawyer instead? And I went, yeah, sure. I like you. I trust you. Let's do it. And weirdly enough, we're still working together 10 years later.
Wow. So. That's amazing. Yeah. No, it seems like, every person I brought so far on this podcast, they get involved in the world of tech or AI always by accident, which is very interesting. I mean, like, obviously me, I mean, I think I did tell you the story. Like I come from a family where they basically wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer. It's a typical ethnic minority family in my case. But I did not want to do that. And I was like, okay, look, can I do biomedical science? It's kind of in between. It's got medicine. I really wanted to do computer science. And then ironically, I discovered AI, studying bioinformatics inside biomedical science, which is like, okay, what are the odds? And here I am. So it's kind of interesting, like how, I guess it's destiny, perhaps. It's like you're meant to do it.
I mean, we're the lucky ones. I'll be honest, in a sort of wider context, it frustrates the life out of me that more people didn't grow up wanting to be in technology or wanting to be in sort of software and development. I wish that at school somebody had pointed out to me that this entire field of careers existed, because I had no idea. I went to a state school, and sort of jobs like lawyers, jobs like doctors, these are obvious. People knew what those were. So that's sort of what you aspired to do. Nobody, I don't think, mentioned to us that actually there was this wild world of sort of computing that you could have done. And I think that's rife in the UK, that we are just undereducated about those kind of careers. Anyway, and there are other places. In Canada, great example, puts it in the curriculum these days. So every university degree has to have a section on new technology to make sure that graduates know about this stuff when they hit the job market. So there you go. You've activated my trap card. That's my non-AI rant.
That's what I rant about education all the time. I mean, the thing is, I shouldn't give my university any credit for this. This is actually the credit is my lecturer, Professor Harris. Hopefully, he's listening. Shout out to Professor Harris. It's more like again, it's an accident. Like we didn't have a module on bioinformatics. Like that wasn't part of my degree, but he was involved in bioinformatics. It was like a growing field at the time. It was new because we're talking about late 90s in like 98, 99, right? So, obviously we didn't have the sort of AI we have today, but he was involved in R&D in relation how to use data mining techniques to decode animal genomes and to be able to decode molecular structures of proteins, that sort of stuff. So he actually figured, because I got along with him really well, and I told him that I'm really into computing. I mean, I love programming and that kind of stuff. I taught myself how to code when I was 10, etc. And he was literally said to me, "Oh, would you be interested in finding out more about how you can use your skills in medical science?" I'm like, "Okay, sure." So he's the one started to teach me about bioinformatics. So it's not really an official education. Like I said, in your case, it's purely by accident. It's like, thankfully, I had this lecturer who just saw my talent in computer science and is like, you know what, I would like you to help me out. You could probably explain to me the techie stuff because he didn't understand much of the techie stuff. So we actually worked together. And then I had a project with that, and that led me towards my master's degree in computer science, where I thought, I want to study this a bit more, and it just went from there. So you're right. I mean, that's not because my university taught all of us bioinformatics. I wish, but you're right. I mean, it's not. I mean, I don't know. I'm surprised. Like they're not. Yeah, I write about this. So you see, it got me started. Like with my kids, my wife and I, we always argue, with their schools and stuff like that. It's like, why aren't you guys teaching them the new stuff? Because it's like my son just finished his A levels, and I'm trying to remember, everything that he went through, GCSEs, A levels. It's the sort of stuff that we were taught 30 years ago. The world has changed in the last 30 years. So why aren't they teaching them the new stuff? I have no idea.
No, well, I mean, the only thing that I wonder is, God, you imagine you teach them the new stuff. Will that be obsolete by the time they graduate? Because I have a son at the exact other end of this, so he starts school in something like 3 or 4 weeks' time, which terrifies me. But good Lord, the idea that you would start teaching people at the start of their school career this kind of thing, God, just think what software development will look like in a decade. Never mind by the time this generation gets out of university. It almost feels like a fool's errand. But there we go.
Yeah. No, but we're actually, well, the world, generally speaking, we live in the most tech savvy sort of world population than ever before. I mean, you don't need to be. I mean, I think we actually live in a world right now where you can easily become a software engineer without a degree. I know a couple of software engineers who are absolutely brilliant, but they have no degrees. Like, they're just self-taught. So, yeah, that's interesting.
Yep.
Do you think, I mean, because obviously now with the rise of AI, and of course there's been a lot of discussions about AI regulations and that sort of thing. Do you think there's going to be um, sort of a compulsory module for AI or tech in law schools, or is it going to be up to
No,
individual lawyers to kind of figure this out?
no, I don't think so. So the way that I think most lawyers will interact with AI, I mean, so there'll be practitioners who sort of advise AI companies on AI and AI regulation. So people like me, but for the majority of lawyers, so 95+%, the way that they'll interact with AI is in the form of legal tools that we use day to day. And we already got at university training and at law school training on the most modern tools that were available at the time. We'll get training on those things. What's interesting to me is what will become ubiquitous. Because when I started practice, we're only just at the point that things like online legal databases had become the standard way of doing the job. So when I was at university, people were still teaching you how to go to the law library, get a big old book off the shelf, thumb through that to figure out where you would find cases and statutes relevant to an area of law. Go to the next bit of the library to find those cases and do that manually. Nobody has done that for years as a lawyer in the UK because there are just online tools that are 100 times better and have got those exact same books with electronically searchable, so quick links and smart searches that you can use. And that's ubiquitous. Everybody works that way now. What interests me is which AI tools will become ubiquitous in the same way, and will just not even think about doing some tasks manually, and which ones will remain nice to have. Some firms do it this way, and some firms don't.
You, well, actually, you reminded me of the silly arguments that we hear these days that AI tools can replace lawyers. Can they?
Not right now, they can't. So, I mean, and
What can
funny
they
to
ever?
say,
Really? I actually don't think they
well,
can ever do personally. But yeah, let's.
I mean, the answer is which lawyers and during which hours of the day. So, can I replace the newly qualified lawyer who has got the unfortunate task of sitting in a data room and reading documents to say which ones are relevant, which ones need a supervisor to look at, which ones are just emailed back and forth about who's doing what on a Friday night and are totally irrelevant to this investigation? I think an AI can probably replace that guy, to be honest. I don't think that that's a good use of that person's time. I don't think it ever was. It was just the best way we had of going through documents. So can we replace that lawyer doing those jobs? I'm sure we can. Can we replace lawyers of sort of 4 years call who've begun to have sector expertise and can start to give clients meaningful advice about strategy? I don't think we can. Um, and
Because you
certainly
have to
not
be
with the
quite
tech today.
creative about it. Like like it's a really case by case, isn't it? And you have to be quite creative about it.
Right. And don't get me wrong, I know that AI vendors, because one of my jobs as part of SMB's partnership and sort of actually running the business of a law firm
Mhm.
is that I do quite a lot of our new technology procurements, and trialing new kit. So we've done a bunch of these now and have looked at what vendors say software can do and what software with AI can actually do. AI is really good at giving you facts and figures you didn't have before and saying, hey, look, you've looked at 10 documents a lot like this, and most of them had, say, a liability cap in this sort of level. So this one, the cap shouldn't be outside that level. And that's helpful from a data perspective, but I don't see that the AI will ever be good enough or ever have the experience and the understanding of a document to say, yes, it's way outside of the norms, but that makes sense here because the following clauses are different. Maybe that justifies it. And if we think about the wider context of the deal and why we're doing it, where we're doing it, that number might make sense. And that's the human operator thing that at this stage of the game, don't see anything that even looks like replacing.
Yeah. Well, the argument I like to make all the time is that it's we're very good at thinking outside the box as
Mhm,
humans. AI is not that good at. Well, I can't see how AI can ever think outside the box in the way that we
mhm.
do. So if you've
Yeah,
got the right data, the right parameters, the patterns are, well organized, etc. Yeah, absolutely, AI can absolutely excel at that. But
yep,
sort of reading between the lines or thinking outside the box, being creative. I mean, this is what differentiates us from machines, because it's
right.
a lot of it is to do with because we don't actually understand intelligence, and I speak here from the medical side of things, because
Mhm,
people think intelligence it's a neurological process or even a biochemical process. I mean, to some extent it's true, but there's a lot of mystery in terms of that sense of understanding, how we just figure things out. We understand
mhm.
things without even any education.
Yes.
This is coming from somewhere. It's consciousness, whatever. I've actually mentioned him before. Like, I think with one of my guests, like we talked a bit about Professor Roger Penrose. I don't know if you've heard of him, quantum
Mhm,
physicist.
okay.
He like with him and his team, they they seem to have figured out that there's a potential link between our consciousness and
Uh,
subatomic processes. So, so we literally talk about quantum computing here, which is not quantum physics, not quantum computing, but that's why there's a bit of a link there as well. But with sort of quantum physics, which is like a completely mysterious world that we just know nothing about. We've got loads of theories, but we don't understand
mhm,
anything about it. So the fact that our consciousness is linked to quantum physics, and that's linked to our process of understanding.
mhm.
Whoever that says, "Oh yeah, we figured out intelligence," is just obviously clueless. We don't have
Yeah.
intelligence. I think that's the issue here.
No, but it's the outside the box thing. You're
Yeah.
right. That sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not necessarily outside of a box, but outside of a very simple set of rules about what you are and aren't allowed to do in a document or in a negotiation. So my current classic example of the AI that we use at SMB to review documents is that it's brilliant as a pair of eyes. So you can turn it loose on documents and say, hey, look, has it got a clause in here that does ABC? And it'll find it way quicker than I could have done it with over a decade of experience. I just can't read it that fast. Great. Likewise, hey, read this document. Tell me which clauses are rubbish clauses for this client. It's good. It picks them out. It gets 90% of them, and it gets them in the click of a finger. Great. It's when it starts being a pair of hands for me that AI falls down. And the example I had where I went, this is the thing it can't replace, was a document a few weeks ago where, having used the AI to do a first pass review and said, well, look, what would you change to it? It can only really haggle. So 90 days notice will come down to 60. Best endeavors will come down to reasonable. These are all good changes, but every now and then you look at something in a document and just go, well, this just shouldn't be here. It's inappropriate for this kind of deal. It doesn't work commercially. We don't do this in this industry, and there's a good reason why. And the AI doesn't have that level of insight into what it's looking at. It recognizes it's onerous. It says, humans don't like this clause. I'll water it down. It has no idea, or at least doesn't have the sort of reasoning capacity to go, no, I'm not just going to haggle with you and try and cut this down to 30 days notice. The answer is no. And this just comes out completely. And so far, I'm yet to see a tool that does that with any degree of effectiveness. So, yeah.
But it's not
So I'm still adding value.
Yeah.
Like,
so how is it different then? I mean, just from your experience, because there is, I wouldn't say a debate, but there are arguments where people try to argue against, for example, large language models and smart search. So, for instance, what you've described right now, one might argue and say, well, you just use smart search. Why do you need LLMs? I mean, are you using LLMs for this particular work?
Yeah, so I mean, look, what we have at the moment, and we are in pilot phase rather than having fully adopted the tool and said this is SMB forever, is a tool that has a number of sort of different functions welded together. So it can do smart search, as you say, in which it finds things based on a natural language query and then summarizes and takes you to places. It does have generative sort of LLM enabled functionality to let you then say, well, great, thanks for getting me here. Could you just and you see if the AI will edit your document or write you a clause that does A, B, and C. And I confess, for me, it's a nice to have. I'm not yet convinced that it's particularly good, in the sense that I don't think that I'm getting the quality out of it that I would want to see in documents. I mean, the thing that worries me. So look, it's cool, great. It's lovely for first drafts. It's like having an NQ or some junior lawyer to do first drafts that you then correct. Helpful. The thing that worries me is not whether lawyers think that LLM functionality has value. It's whether clients do, because I mean, I don't know what a well-engineered seatbelt looks like. I know only that when I get into a car, I sort of pull a strap across me and it clicks, and I assume it's doing the business. I think that clients will be a lot like that with LLM-generated legal content. It will look a lot like a contract, and you'll read it through and go, "Oh, it makes sense to me," but you're not going to know unless you're a qualified lawyer who's capable of reviewing it and genuinely understanding what the effect of that document is, what happens when it meets a collision. And I worry a little bit, quite a lot of clients will buy into LLM for speed and convenience and not really understand what they're missing. And I've seen that with other waves of legal technology in the past. And I don't think LLMs will be any different.
Yeah, well, that's the issue. It's especially with something like hallucinations. I mean, this is where the dangers of AI, and it's something I've been calling this out for years, and I'm doing this on this podcast as well, where I say that you cannot trust the output of any AI 100%, because there's always that risk of hallucination. You can obviously reduce that risk, but you can never eliminate it. But the problem is, unfortunately, some of my counterparts, they try to claim that you can still trust it. And there are others that even had the audacity to say that their AI never hallucinates, which is like, I'm sorry, that's a lie. That's not, there's no such a thing as AI that never hallucinates. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose that probably brings us to regulation, perhaps? Because for me,
Yes.
I think regulation should be. I mean, I don't know. It's a long debate, I think, but I personally think the regulation has to be about keeping the end user safe and
Mhm.
informed. So who should be responsible for that? Is it the AI companies that produce the models, or the companies that buy these models, or say rent these models, say from like OpenAI, and then deploy it to their customers?
My strong feeling is that AI should work like any other product liability chain, and that the ultimate liability should lay with AI vendors. The problem with that is that a lot of the time it's too difficult, too complicated, don't understand it, and regulators will go and try and regulate the user where they can understand the behavior. From my perspective, it ought to be like any other product, which is to say the person who made it bears responsibility, and that responsibility can get passed back up the chain once the end user suffers some harm as a result of failure. Like that's how we would do it with physical goods. I don't see why we wouldn't do that with electronic goods. I worry a little bit that that won't be quite the way it works out in the long run.
But because I heard oh, I forgot his name, but I saw a lawyer, I think on social media, that was arguing that we already have, certainly in the UK, we already have the regulation, existing regulation that should protect users from AI and businesses from AI, and put more responsibility and guardrails around the AI vendors. Is that true?
We've got some. So a lot of people sort of imagine that AI is a new technology, and they only started using ChatGPT last year. And gosh, the law must be hurrying to catch up with this. The answer is we actually got quite a lot of AI regulation, but it's not labeled AI regulation. So one of my favorite facts about our Copyright Designs and Patents Act is that if you go back to the 1980s and you read Hansard and you read the actual sort of transcript of Parliament arguing about what should and shouldn't be in the new Copyright Designs and Patents Act, you can read members of the House of Lords saying how wonderfully forward thinking we are that this new CDPA will cover artificial intelligence when we invent such a thing. Like we thought of this. So for
Wow.
copyright, and right, like we're almost unique in the world in the United Kingdom in having, I mean, in a very rudimentary way in the 1980s, thought about the possibility that computers might generate new works rather than being sort of user led. So we've got that. So copyright, yeah, there's some rules there. You find vestiges of AI regulation in the GDPR. There's a clause there's an article in there that talks about automated regulation. There's a whole load of computer offences that will regulate things that you might do with a computer. There's a whole load of passing off claims for things that you might, where one is infringing other people's material, look, feel without necessarily ripping off their trademark. There's it's not as if this is the Wild West in which AI is unregulated. What we don't have is a cohesive body of law that talks about liability for generative models that might get used in products downstream, if you're with me. For those, you're still in essentially negligence claims or contract claims. What did the vendor offer me? And the answer is that OpenAI and Google will offer you not much. And what we could really do with is some form of, be it a tort regime or a sort of statutory duty regime, where we talk about accuracy, marking, and I suspect breach of intellectual property, which is just occasioned by LLM or similar spitting out random results that is all predicated on someone else's IP that it never had the right to use.
Wow. I mean, because obviously there's whole debate, although that's in America, but the whole Scarlett Johansson
Yes.
argument with OpenAI, and it's actually a question that I was in an event that was like in a panel discussion,
Mm.
and one of the attendees asked me what if she, or rather, how could she protect her voice, because she's a singer. How could she protect her voice from LLM companies basically
Yep.
using her voice illegally? And if that's, because she wants to promote her music, but she's genuinely worried about that. But also, what if she does? Well, I suppose she will publish her music online. What happens if she does discover that an LLM company indeed use her voice to generate whatever output it generates. What sort of are there any legal
Yep.
protections for people like her?
Well, interestingly, she's stumbled right into one of the loopholes that exist for AI. So we've got well-tested doctrines for people's image. So in the US, and I'm not a US lawyer, but they have fairly well-developed doctrines of image rights. They don't have doctrines of voice rights. That's a whole new thing.
Mhm.
Similarly, in the UK, we've got doctrines about passing off and what's the word? Making it look as if there is an endorsement by someone when in fact there isn't an endorsement or an association. We've got rules on personal data. So can you or can't you take my data and use it? But is a voice that sounds 98% like Scarlett Johansson really Scarlett Johansson's personal data?
Yeah.
And so voices, weirdly, are a thing that it's always been very hard to imitate, that we don't have a particularly well developed body of law for. And I know that in America, they are rapidly addressing that because there are some very, very powerful music and film lobbies making them do that. But you're right that the young woman you're talking to has has hit on one of those loopholes where we do need some specific regulation now that AI enables it. So yeah,
Wow.
and the answer is look, we ought to have voice rights in just the same way you'd expect to have some control over your image being slapped on things. Yes, so it should be with every other aspect of your person.
So should people like her wait until a law like that emerges, or
Well, I mean, in a way, she doesn't have to, but good luck in the meantime.
yeah,
The truth is, that if someone is reproducing your voice on command when someone types the name into an LLM, you know for a fact that your personal data just it must have been scraped somewhere along the line. That is probably your first port of call to the actual model generator. There is then, well, hang on, what are you doing with it? With that auto-generated voice, to say, well, look, I'm not happy with it. It's clearly me. I must be owed a royalty for a performance, but you haven't technically performed. But that's probably what you would wave as your stick to try and get some money out of the part of, what are we calling them? The party that's using your voice.
yeah.
Your other, depending on what they're doing, they say, well, look, I've got a passing off claim because you're trying to associate whatever it is you're doing with me, because otherwise, why is my voice booming out of the speakers? So that's my second line of attack. The problem is that those would all be novel claims that you can't say, I'm a slam dunk winner because someone else has trodden this path before me.
Yeah.
You're on uncertain ground. And I can think, I mean, just off the top of my head, if I was defending that, what I would say to each one of them, you, you're not yet in a place where you've got strong claims, but obvious use of your voice.
And is that because I'm starting to see,
Mm.
unfortunately, again, my counterparts use a language that is quite devious, in my opinion, where they say we have the
Yep,
right to train our models from the openly available content on the web. Or sometimes they say
yep,
from the content that is available on the open web, right?
yeah,
So, which is like, yeah. So basically, they want to say, yeah, if you've got a YouTube channel, yeah, we have the right to download your videos, which of course you don't. But they're starting to use that
yeah,
language quite a lot recently. I've noticed. Can you
yes.
sort of clarify that to the listeners? Like, is there such a thing as an openly available content on the web?
At the end of it, obviously, no, there isn't.
Exactly.
Putting it online is not a sort of public release. Now, otherwise, what on earth would open source licenses be for? If you
Yeah,
could just use any old thing on the
exactly.
internet as you please. What's interesting is that there is a genuine divide between US and European, and I include the UK in that thinking, because we do have very different rules about public domain and about databases. So, frustratingly, for the European developer, it's a much more restrictive environment here. The fact that someone's data is on somewhere like LinkedIn does not mean that it's an all-you-can-eat buffet of data about people. It's all personal data, and GDPR expects you to think about that data in a very particular way. So that's blocker number one that doesn't exist in the US. Um, and I say LinkedIn because LinkedIn lost that case in the US.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yes, you can scrape LinkedIn for data about people on LinkedIn because it's public domain. The other thing that exists in Europe that I don't believe has a strong equivalence in the US is database rights. So where you take a load of facts and figures, so Premier League results, Wolverhampton won, Arsenal two, and put those into a great big list of what are prosaic facts, but that you have put the effort into compiling, that database is yours. And you can regulate the use of it in a way very similar to the way that you can regulate use of a copyrighted work of art, even though there's no artistry, it's facts.
Mm.
So you can prevent people from scraping or extracting from that database in a way that is systematic and designed to build another product. But that's a very European way of thinking about databases that in the US doesn't exist. And in the US, you're thinking more about copyright and whether someone has copied your ideas in the way that you've compiled a database. So the protection is, and again, not a US lawyer. There is a US lawyer watching this. Feel free to phone in and contradict me. But the position is weaker for defense of rights, well, defense of material that's on the open web versus in Europe. But again, it's still not an all-you-can-eat buffet because Americans have got copyright and they've got fair use and they've got patents. So again, it's not a buffet. It's just a little bit freer than over here.
And I think there seems to be a movement. I think from the political side. I mean, I think, well, if Kamala Harris becomes president, I think there is a move where they want it to be more like the European approach in terms of protecting user data. And I know the VCs are very much against it. I mean, I don't know, you probably saw in the news, and I actually called them out on a different video. The VCs, like the top Silicon Valley VCs, are literally endorsing Trump and endorsing MAGA, even though they're, even though they came up with all these silly videos where they say, "Yeah, no, we've always been Democrats. No, we don't support the MAGA movement. We don't support Project 2025." Which is such a stupid thing to say, because I thought, well, obviously you are, because if you're endorsing him, you are just as responsible in making it happen. But they argue that they do not want the same level of control that we have here in Europe, and
Well,
even attacking. They even attacking Europe to say that we're not as innovative as America because of these regulations and so on, which I think is probably nonsensical.
Well, who knows? But you're right. In US dialogue, there is a battle of vested interest that just doesn't have an easy equivalent in Europe, because, as you say, you've got voices in the Democrat Party who've been saying for years that they want an American equivalent of the GDPR, and they got pretty close to passing it under the Biden term. They will come again under the next Democrat term. So a US federal GDPR rather than just state by state patchwork, which is what you have at the moment, that's on the cards. Is the perennial anti-monopolist sentiment about the likes of Google and Apple to say, well, hang on, are these not industries, sort of organizations that are just too big and need to be broken up into constituent parts in the same way as people like Hewlett Packard were back in the day? And you can see from a consumer protection point of view why those might be considered fairly strong arguments. But the problem is problem depends how you see the world. There is a countervailing block of interests in the US, which is big tech, that says, well, no, don't break us up. We're your value generating champions of industry. Look at the S&P and look at who the sort of top 5, top 10 are. Look at the percentage of the value of the entire S&P index that we are. The value comes from us being these massive world-beating companies. For the love of everything, don't cut away at the way we've been doing business, because otherwise you're killing the golden goose. Do you really want to do it? And if it's not us, it will be equally massive players from other places in the world, and that place is China. And that's the dialogue in the US that creates that tension. We don't have it in Europe at all, because there just isn't that level of strength in the tech industry. Europe is far more, and when I say this, I mean EU. EU is far more dominated by the regulator voice than it is by the lobbying voice, because the most powerful lobbyists are Americans, essentially saying, please don't fine us. And regulators just love the idea of keeping using American big tech as a sort of piggy bank that can give you $1 billion every year.
Yeah. I mean, and interesting because I like to sort of, I'm fascinated by American politics. I think it's fun to watch, but I think this time it's quite, I would say, almost existential, because Project 2025. I don't know if you read the summary. I mean, I read the summary of it.
I do. I mean,
it's weird.
I mean, and I know the response from sort of Republicans of my acquaintance is to say, look, scaremongering. This is a think tank's ideas for the future. It's not the manifesto. So yes, if one believes that Project 2025 is effectively the Trump manifesto, yes, existential. I know sort of people whose intellects I respect greatly who say no, that is just the attack line to try to associate this toxic document with a marginally less toxic candidate.
Yeah, well, that's what they said about Liz Truss until she became prime minister. Look what happened. I mean, we suffered the consequences of that. I mean, it can, because the thing is, like, I mean, again, I'm not an
A
expert.
mad fortnight.
It's a crazy. Oh man, my goodness.
Another one
Even
to
the
talk
Queen
about.
died. Jesus. Okay, nothing
So,
to do with the Queen. Nothing to do. Just it's a joke. It's a joke. For other lawyers out there.
this is, I think the thing about the trust, the sort of the trust fortnight is I do sort of go, God, was that real? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And I sometimes think back to COVID, and I'm like, God, do you remember there was a time when I used to go for a walk in the park and there was police tape on all the benches to stop me sitting down? I think, was that real? Did that really happen? And I feel a similar way to the sort of insane couple of weeks of Liz Truss,
Yeah.
in which everything just seemed to have gone really quite mad
Yeah. Yeah.
until we all just came to our senses. But there we
Yeah.
are.
But that's the argument actually I made in the other video where I said basically, effectively, it's not a political argument, but I was saying to my American friends and family, I said, look, we actually had our own version, as it were, maybe not Project
Mm.
2025. I mean, like, thankfully, nobody was trying to ban abortion or anything like that. Thankfully, at least not yet, anyway. But we had Brexit. We had, of course, Liz Truss. We had COVID, and it's run by the same ideology that basically is the MAGA ideology, and not as extreme, but close enough. And we've suffered. And I basically highlighted, said, look, this is what happened here. You guys do the same in America. The same will happen there. Like, there's no ifs and buts about it. It's not scaremongering. It's the same people. It's the same mafia, I suppose, at the top. And and the issue for me, though, because like the main reason why I wanted to make that video wasn't about politics. It's about AI regulation. The argument I made, and again, the link is in the description, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But sorry, my chair seems to be moving. One of the points that I made, that the future of AI, if we want a positive future, we need to regulate AI. If you want a dystopian future, don't regulate AI. I mean, I think it's as simple as that, because the thing is, we talked about, we had the debate for Brexit, for example. Oh, now we can make our own laws, all right? We can do our own thing. Don't worry about the other. Well, that never happened, okay? With Liz Truss, same sort of nonsense. Like, we can do we can grow the economy, just get rid of all of the logic, economic logic, whatever. We'll create our own rules. That never happened, and everything just broke apart. Now with AI, we can't afford that, because AI is a powerful tool. Like, it's really a powerful tool. And we've already seen, I don't know if you saw Elon Musk's latest release of Grok, where basically it's a totally unhinged AI. He decided he doesn't want to respect regulation or copyright or anything like that. Zero guardrails. And of course, X or Twitter was flooded with pretty disturbing AI
Yep.
generated imagery. You know, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, I think, but it's more things like Kamala Harris and Donald Trump snogging. I think some Disney characters flying the airplanes into the World Trade Center, basically things like
Yeah.
that. And I thought, my God, I mean, Disney will go
Yeah.
after him for sure, because you can't. I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but if you're using you generate Mickey Mouse, and it's not a variant, it's 100% Mickey Mouse, but
Yep.
basically holding a knife, because Mickey Mouse just stabbed people to death and there's blood everywhere. My God, I mean,
Yeah.
that, and this is just
But
a tiny.
that's your liability chain that I was talking about earlier.
Yes.
What's your cause of action? You
Yeah.
are the Walt Disney Corporation, and Elon Musk will say, "Well, what have I got to do with it? It's an image generator. I'm just a guy who sells paintbrushes." You've got to go after the artists,
Mm.
and I personally don't think that that's an acceptable place for AI regulation to end up, because you're putting, yeah, I mean, in the same way as the sort of right to bear arms, we're no longer people with sort of shot and pellet muskets, with people in America who can buy assault weapons. It's AI is like that with technology.
Mm.
really. You've got to regulate the distribution and the safety rails on it, because otherwise you're putting absolute lunacy into the hands of people who, with all due respect to humans, just should not be allowed unguardrailed rail technology.
Yeah.
And yet I'm sympathetic to people who say, well, hang on a second, we ought to make sure that regulation isn't just ideology back door.
Mm-hmm.
We can't allow AI to be a technology that will only produce material which favors one point of view, because that point of view, we don't necessarily in 2024 have a monopoly on truth and reason for all time. We do have to be quite careful about what the regulation looks like, but regulation there must be to prevent, as you say, defamatory, hateful content in which we are picturing obscene things with much loved works of intellectual property.
Mm. But also spread with misinformation, and we've seen that recently with the riots. I mean, that was basically there was some AI used in there. People kind of generated fake images and content that basically riled up the far right and basically encouraged them to go out there and frankly commit terrorism. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, what they've terrorized communities, and they literally wanted to go out there, burn mosques and attack Muslim people and black people as well. So it's like that is the consequence of unregulated tech, and if you allow AI to go completely unhinged, and as you said, if you allow the regular Joe in the street to use a powerful tool like that, well, you get riots as an example.
Right. And the thing is, it's unforgivable, and we mustn't be complacent about that kind of thing, because it's not something. What's the word I'm looking for? Rioting, civil disobedience. That kind of hateful conduct isn't limited to people we disagree with. In the wrong hands and with the wrong intent, people can be made to commit awful acts in the name of causes that we might think are good. So when we think about regulating misinformation, we think about regulating that kind of harmful content, we ought not approach it thinking, how can we regulate far right hate speech? We ought to think of it much more holistically about how can we regulate hateful speech or dangerous speech or speech that is inciting people to criminal acts, because rioting and dreadful conduct is it's not exclusively a far right phenomenon. People have done dreadful things in the name of causes left, right, and centre
Absolutely, yeah,
through human history.
yeah,
And it's but that's what I mean. I mean, the problem is that regulators do tend, in the year of our Lord 2024, to come from a reasonably narrow part of the political spectrum, and I do worry that we might end up baking in 2024's fashionable modes of thinking as regulation for all time. And we ought to think much more even-handedly about regulation of content than that.
It's definitely become much more political. I agree. I mean, because we've even seen that during the BLM marches here, because we had a fairly, I mean, I can't remember who was the prime minister at the time. Was Boris Johnson the prime minister? So they were quite almost on the
it wasn't Liz Truss, but
it wasn't Liz Truss. That's what I mean.
I'm betting Boris Johnson in that case.
Yeah, I think it was Boris
Johnson.
Right.
It's late half 2020, so Boris is just arisen. He has a great big majority. I reckon he's about 6-7 months in.
Yeah,
that's my bet for all time.
And they basically tried to politicize. Again, it's like it's a sort of thing, like you said. So you've got people in government who are much sort of further to the right, and they weren't happy with these protesters, and they basically tried to effectively suppress freedom of speech and protesting, which is something that they said that they're trying to protect, but they didn't like the idea that the BLM marches were there. And as you said, that now there's a danger that we might end up moving in the opposite direction and achieving the same thing. So we're basically politicizing law and freedom of speech.
People will say, but hang on a second, should we not have been cracking down on those demonstrations? Some would call them riots. Should we not have cracked down those equally hard? And the answer is, well, whatever we choose to do with riots, we ought to apply the same band of tolerance to everything, no matter where it comes from on the political spectrum. And for AI, that must be right where we come to regulating speech. So when we do regulation, and one of the things that I do want to say is we need to think quite hard about who does that regulating and where it comes from. It absolutely has to be tested to the nth degree to make sure that it is neutral and isn't trying to embed values that are effectively 2024's policy choices into law for all time, because that's the worry with it. And when I say where regulation comes from, I'm going to put my cards on the table and say that this is not a moment for the EU to lead mankind.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. I mean, that's very interesting because then, based on what you just said, I guess the vendors are fully responsible then in terms of how they train the language models, because obviously we don't know how they train them. I mean, even I made yet another video where I
Mhm,
talked about Meta's Llama 3.1, which is
mhm,
basically practically as good as GPT-4 now, 4.0. But even though it's okay, it's free, they kind of like to describe this open source, but it's not really open source because we still don't know how they train the data behind it. So open source means that you need to know everything, right, from top to bottom. But we don't. We don't know how Llama was trained.
yep.
Um, but I mean, so is it going to be then in this case like the political contents of Llama? I presume it's the responsibility of Facebook, or rather Meta. They are
Right.
responsible how they train Llama, whether it's to the right or to the left or balanced. Correct?
Yeah, exactly that.
Mm.
And what I'm looking for in my utopian future world is a place in which essentially Western democracy will have a joined up approach to the way that it regulates AI.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, there are two places that the Western world might credibly start regulating AI from. One is Brussels, the other is Washington. Brussels has, for a long time, had the attitude that there is a Brussels effect. Europe is a trade superpower. And so whatever we regulate here can be as forward thinking and as pro consumer as we like, and the world will follow because the world must follow if it wants to do business with the world's largest joined up economic bloc.
Mm.
And the problem with that is that you kind of get to see how that looks with GDPR. People, Europe had assumed that the world would be desperate to have free data exchange with Europe and so would follow GDPR effectively to the letter to get its adequacy decision. Doesn't work that way. The US has cheerfully said, well, we can do without it, and storms ahead for tech innovation.
Yeah.
Places like China have not looked at the EU and said, yes, we'll follow your way. They've done it their own way and said, no, you need to come up to our standards.
Mm.
And one might cynically think that it's just been a huge excuse for more state surveillance.
Yeah.
In the PRC. It's it's an illustration that the world will not necessarily follow Europe, do it Europe's way, and create a seamless joined up web. What it might do is be inspired and create individualized trading blocks that have got very different standards. And I feel that Europe's natural tendency to storm ahead and to see itself as having regulatory primacy will end up with us having this very uneven two-tier approach across US, Europe, and then rest of world. And the rest of world, I suspect, will probably go America because America is where the innovation is happening and where the actual vendors are.
Or maybe China. I mean, China are pushing the boundaries with AI. I mean, they're catching up. I mean, Um, I saw an article. I think it was probably Forbes, where how the Chinese AI tech sector and the experts from the Chinese AI tech sector were saying that they didn't manage to build their own LLMs at the same level as the US,
Mhm.
but and they made this very interesting statement that China is the best in the world when it comes to catching up. So they might not
Yeah.
come up with the tech first,
Uh,
but once they figure it out, they
mm,
will come after you big time. And we're actually seeing that with the EV market. Look how
yep.
China is evolving with EVs. It's truly crazy, amazing.
Yep.
And the other thing that
Mhm.
not many people talk about, which to my absolute shock, is quantum computing. I mean,
Ah,
the Chinese government is, burning cash
mhm,
for quantum computing. Like they're building quantum computing
mhm.
farms, right? So, we're here talking about, oh, we've got a couple of quantum computers here. Look at us, how amazing they are.
Yep.
These guys have quantum computing farms. So they are catching up big
Yep.
time. So I agree with you. Like it's definitely a
Yeah.
bit of segregation going on. They've got Washington, Brussels, but we absolutely have to include Beijing in here.
Mhm. It's interesting. Well, so yes and no in the sense of will Beijing's rules on AI ever be rules that are mirrored and adopted here in the UK?
That's
I
the
can't
problem.
see
Yeah.
a political future in which we do that. Uh, At
But
worst, it will just be a trade
there have
barrier.
to be some kind of alignment because the Chinese are eating away the market, so they have to do something. They can't.
It's interesting. I sort of look at American protectionism in action for AI. So, by way of disclosure, I know and love a number of lawyers in China who I see very regularly. Talk about the work that they're doing, the work I'm doing. A lot of them do technology law, so they are open in saying, yeah, look, the innovation we see here just isn't where American innovation is with AI. It's not as good. The Chinese manufacturers don't get me the fidelity and the accuracy that I get when I use American models trained on Chinese language data. So they say slightly behind. And then when you talk about sort of processing grunt, one of the things that has fascinated me in the world of American regulation has been the ratcheting up of sanctions on China designed purely to stop NVIDIA from exporting particular types
Yeah,
of
I heard
graphics
about
cards.
that.
Right, in which they'll sort of say, well, look, the most powerful one is 100 units. You're not allowed anything that's 100 units or more.
Mm.
So NVIDIA makes a slightly top-down version that's 95 units. Okay, fine. We're turning it down to 95. Okay, we make a 90. And essentially, the regulator just is playing whack-a-mole with NVIDIA's Chinese export model to try to keep processing firepower
Mm.
out of Chinese hands for the time being.
Mm.
And I mean, like you say, incredible for catching up and also terrifyingly effective for adoption. So
Yeah.
blockchain, remember that? People said, hey, that's going to be great for document management in legal. There's loads of systems that can be improved. We're not using blockchain in
Mm.
sort of government legal systems in the UK.
No.
No chance. In Jinan, in China, if you are submitting papers in court straight onto a blockchain system,
Mm.
they've already moved the entire processing system onto blockchain. So they said, yep, absolutely, can do, we're adopting. So it fascinates me to see how fast Chinese industry will adopt AI, definitely compared to European and probably compared to American.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, the one thing about the issue, I mean, I know you're not an expert in the EU AI Act, but
Mm,
from what I've been reading, I think the way they think, to me, it sounds like the way they want to regulate AI, it sounds ridiculous actually, because they seem to be focusing on kind of like what I said with Nvidia, that the
mm,
American regulators say, well, you can't sell it with with 100 units, so
yep.
okay, yeah, you can just push it back, but it's not the power of the processing that is the key
Mm,
factor here. And in the EU, from my understanding, is that they want to control the size of the models. So if you're an AI company, like I think Mistral were complaining about that,
mm,
that they were saying, well, actually, we need to build bigger models if we are to build smarter AI. And apparently the AI Act is not allowing them to do that. It says like, no, there's certain limitations, which to me is quite silly because the power of AI isn't in its size. I mean, the misinformation
mm,
problem we had back in 2016 wasn't there because we had humongous AI models. We just had
mm,
AI. You don't need big AI models or big microchips to literally create havoc or even create, digital
mm,
transformation within businesses. I mean, companies, manufacturers been doing it for decades with AI and automation before we had all the current technology. So for me, it's the application. I mean, the danger is here, not just the size of the model, but it's the application, but also like we talked about earlier, it's how
mm.
you build these models, right? Are you building it on with toxic material? Are you building it with stolen copyright material? And for me,
Yeah,
the AI Act doesn't seem to be talking enough about that. Again, from the coverage, I could be wrong. I mean, again, anybody
yeah.
who knows more,
I
please
mean,
comment. But that's
that
my
is true.
perception.
So, we have separate rafts of legislation in the UK and the EU. They are these days they are separate and free floating. So we have
Mhm.
Online Harms Act in the UK,
Yeah.
and then there is a whole sort of Digital Services Act sort of package in Europe, which is all about regulating content. So there is some effort to regulate content, but that is all about regulating content as content rather than thinking about AI generated content. I mean, like you say, I am going to slightly swerve the AI Act questions, given the infancy of it and given how early we are in practice with it. But what I will say is I think it follows a European trend in recent years of legislation that is designed to regulate about 5 companies worldwide, and they're all American, right? So
Yeah.
having having got very used in the GDPR era that we live in of using big tech as a bit of a piggy bank,
Mhm.
there is a trend to have a content regulation. We're guilty of this in the UK too, that is designed to regulate about 5 or 6 global platforms worldwide. Similarly, with AI, I think that a lot of the intention really is to regulate what is currently an American dominated market from Brussels, rather than really thinking about what can be done to foster innovation and ensure that innovation is high quality, good for the consumer innovation in Europe. I think that's what the AI Act is, without going further.
Wow. Yeah. Do you think the presidential election will make any difference in terms of whether or not Europe would be influenced to? I mean, I don't know. Would Europe ever force America to align itself with the EU, or will America ever force Europe to align itself with America, or or the political egos are
Yeah.
so overinflated that they just would never do that, even though the need is there. It's obvious they have to be aligned.
So I would like it to be. I mean, we have reached a point recently in world affairs where we recognise that actually corporate tax did need some harmonisation
Yeah.
worldwide. The idea that we might do a similar thing for I think is within our grasp. I would like to see that, a collaborative model in which it would essentially be a dialogue between Washington and Brussels, but hey, everyone else in the Western world is invited to chip in. I mean, let's not kid ourselves about how it would work. I would like to see that as a global harmonization that recognizes that AI is not technology to be taken lightly.
Yeah.
And likewise, it isn't one where a siloed approach in which we are effectively being protectionist is going to work, because it won't, is the answer.
Yeah.
But
Or
could that ever be a? But yeah, sorry.
I was about to say they see it as an economic powerhouse for themselves. It's like every country that says, well, if we lead the world in
Yeah,
AI, we're going to be the leading economy. So for them, it's really much more inward looking rather than, like you said earlier,
yeah,
they're not thinking about the impact on humanity. That's like a secondary thought. And I'm
yeah,
just wondering, is well, maybe because just they don't understand the technology. Most likely, most of them don't. But it's just the idea that think, oh, we want to be the superpower of AI, therefore we'll be the superpower, sort of rather an economic superpower. But
mhm,
the problem is, yeah, that can impact humanity in a pretty, it's kind of like the nuclear
yeah,
energy, right? Like you need to have that global regulation. You can't, imagine if
yeah.
you lived in a world where every country had its own nuclear regulation. I mean, we
No,
would have had a nuclear war by now, for sure.
right, exactly, and you're right. I do. It's a technology that deserves that same level of
Uh,
multilateral
yeah.
treaty,
Yes.
in which we'll say, well, as a sort of responsible sweep of nations across the globe that make up reasonable a reasonably joined up trading bloc. These are the rules that we will all follow, and we're all agreeing them at the same time around the same table, so that nobody is developing a set of rules which are essentially there to be protectionist by the back door, or indeed protectionist by the front door.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, in the way that
Well,
some
it is right
regulators
now.
think about regulation,
Yeah.
right?
Mm. See, because we talked about all of that, but I think it's important that we sort of consider smaller businesses because
Mm,
obviously all of that, we're talking about the big corporations, big government, etc.
yeah,
Where does that leave the startup community? Because of course that's the majority of the business community.
yeah.
Smaller
Good
businesses,
question.
startups. Where do we fit in within
Yeah,
this crazy world of regulation and politics? Because it is
good
basically
question.
a storm of politics, isn't it? Egotistic politics.
Yes. Well, the nice thing about my job is that I do actually see quite a lot of these sort of nuts and bolts businesses where founders start something, build something, exit something. So we are at the point now we've actually got experience of seeing cradle to grave AI businesses in which the founder has started a business, built one, scaled one, and then exited and sold one. So I can begin to say with some degree of authority what doesn't work for tech founders on that journey. What absolutely doesn't work is two things. One is thin layer of skin around pre-existing products. Investors and anybody looking to buy a business is too sophisticated for that. A few guys got really lucky and really quick in the sort of early days of ChatGPT to just build something they flipped in 6 months. It doesn't work. And if an open model, which isn't ring fenced and closed off, and your own instance of an AI sits at the heart of the product, it isn't investable, it isn't sellable. So Don't even try. You'll fail procurements with big clients. They will not buy unless they can be sure that their data is not being used to train an AI that then delivers for a competitor. And the investors just don't see the value if you're a layer of skin over an open
In
model.
existing, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that has really interested me is content, and really, because we talked earlier, I said, well, hang on, is everything on the open web just an all-you-can-eat buffet? Uh, Certainly not in SME land. OpenAI talks that way, and the rules are different for billionaires. But for SMEs, the hardest bit of the diligence has been to talk about training data and rights to training data. Be that training data which is sourced from the open web or training data which is sourced during customer engagements. That's something that people absolutely have to get right from the start, and have really well documented IP and data management policies, because that has just been like pulling out teeth at exit time for price chipping and for sort of putting deals in jeopardy. Also, the other thing, ethics policies. So it is now a standard ask, can you believe? And I'm amazed how quickly this came about, for buyers or investors in AI products to say, can I see your ethical development policy, please?
Really, that's interesting.
Right.
Because not
Well,
long ago, some
yeah,
VCs told me that this whole ethics stuff is bullshit. So it's
yeah.
nice to see that they seem to have changed their minds recently, or some of
Well,
them.
I mean, I don't know how carefully they're reading them, but everybody is asking for them. So the
That's
way
good.
that a lot of lawyering works is that in transactions where you want to do the same process every time, like M&A, there are very commonly available precedent documents to say, look, here is what a good business sale agreement looks like, so that you
Mm.
tick all the boxes. And your lawyers will negotiate those and cut bits that are relevant, change bits that need to change, but they all start from the same place. All of those commonly used documents now have a place for AI diligence. And the big thing in there that isn't what you'd expect to see, maybe, is the ethics policy. And I'll be honest with you, I've yet to do an AI disposal in which I said, look, this ethics policy, and the founder said, oh yeah, I've got a great one ready to go. It always looks a little bit like a napkin with pen on, I'll be honest.
Yeah, that's well, that's good. That's
Mm,
actually very good because that's something that I've been shouting and screaming about for the past five
mm,
years. Like, you need to put ethics first. So now that they
yeah,
actually, that they're expecting it, that's
yes.
really good.
Well, the lawyers are expecting it. The question is, to what extent is your investor or buyer reading it,
Mm.
having had to a lawyers go, there's the box.
Yeah.
And that always fascinates me, because, of course, lawyers, they're risk averse people. They want to tick all the boxes.
Mm.
The investor will often get the lawyers to do 100% diligence, and then they'll have a few key issues where they really care.
Mm.
And you quickly get a sense of which points are investor led and which points are just lawyers looking to tick off the due diligence checklist boxes. Because, as I say, there's been some pretty hastily together or codified ethics policies. I'm yet to see it be a sticking point.
But going back to the point you made earlier in terms of
Yes,
the content,
yes,
because we work with basically enterprise clients where
mm,
they're happy to use existing LLMs, like Claude or GPT, etc.
mm,
But so long as it's on a private server, so we don't use OpenAI, we use Azure because it's enterprise security.
yep,
You effectively get your own GPT model, and so
yes,
closed off, as it were. So they seem to be okay with the idea that so long as we can tame this down, then
mm,
they're happy for us then to use their data, their internal data, and basically we
yep,
don't train GPT with their data. We create like a separate sort of micro model that sits on
yes,
top of GPT. But what happens then to startups? Because if startups are not dealing with enterprises and they need to use third party content, now they don't have the money or the capacity to build their own model. They would have to
mm,
use an open model of some kind, right? Let's say GPT.
yes,
So how would this work? Because effectively, if GPT potentially has copyrighted material, then how from the legal point of view, how could they say, well, actually,
mm,
this has nothing to do with us, but we've got our ethical policy and
yep,
protections for the open content on the web, and we probably have agreements
yep,
with copyright owners, etc. But that does
mm.
not protect them from any copyright issue within GPT, does it?
No, and nobody's looking for that. I think everyone sort of recognizes that if you can say, look, I've got a ring-fenced GPT or similar running here on this server, which isn't sending your data to who knows where in
Yeah.
California, good enough. Likewise, the idea that those models have been trained on open source data, I think people are comfortable enough with the idea that those LLMs have got their own legal protection and an indemnity in the agreement in your favor. People aren't interrogating that. The wrinkle is when you take that model and say, right, I am now going to take my publicly sourced model and start training it on data that is relevant to my use case.
Yeah.
And people run into real obstacles there, because it's quite easy when you're in development mode to just get
You
data,
just want to,
train model,
yeah,
right, worry about it
and
later.
fine
And then
tune it.
people will say, well, where did it come from? And you go, oh,
Mm.
was it ever allowed in there? And once it's in there, can you get it out? And I know that we had it was a med tech, so it was a drug discovery company that said, look, we can use AI to do quite a lot of the work that chemists would do to hypothesize new compounds that might treat particular illnesses. And they had access to huge amounts of data as academics, quite freely under academic licenses, and very reasonably had trained the model using the academic licenses. They had then spun out into a world of being a very much for-profit, not the university anymore company with that model, that had said, well, hang on a second, we've still got all of our license keys. We can still use all the same pharmacopoeias. We can still take all that data in. And we had some real difficulties trying to unpick the IP management there, because that was just using data without a license, and that was a really tough one to solve with Via. And eventually we had to go get a license and sort of pay back fees and all the rest of it to make sure that had been used. But you can imagine if that was data just taken from the open web,
Yeah.
where there wasn't a provider that you could go and unpick it with, that could have been really quite fatal to a risk averse purchaser, which was a sort of multinational pharmaceuticals company.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm.
So the advice for
Yeah,
startups then would be, having some kind of agreement,
no,
where you can.
honestly, it can be much simpler. So that we don't need to be legal about this. We can be really techy about it. You need to think about data in models in the same way that you think about open source software.
Mm.
So it's long been known, it's an absolute landmine, that if you're building around copyleft licensed open source software, that's a killer. It takes away all the value in a business.
Yeah.
People need to think about data in the same way as open source software, like open source data, open source software. You've got to have a license to use that data, which you can then just hold up, say, there it is,
Yeah.
and it doesn't come with onerous terms and conditions. And if you can do that, fire away. And for a lot of people, the answer will just be, hey, I need to figure out how much the license fee for the data is if this is going to be viable.
Yeah.
Some other arrangement with that data provider.
Yeah. But now,
What I'll say,
yeah.
sorry,
No, carry on.
you can be really creative. People, I think, especially people who are first time founders who aren't used to sort of business to business agreements, often think it's pay money or nothing. I've had a lot of luck with founders who found collaborative ways of developing with market incumbents. So that will often be saying, well, look, I'd love to use your data. I know it's not for sale, but what if you were to get some kind of options? What if you were to get first use of the product? What if you were to get a royalty? You can find all sorts of ways to partner with organizations that have got a position in the market that you need access to,
Yeah.
that isn't just a click and play license. But you've got to be willing to go talk to these people, show your hand about what you're doing, and not just develop in stealth mode. But in a way, why do that? Because you're not developing anything with value if it's got huge IP risk.
Yeah. And actually, this is something that I've noticed recently. Like a lot of the enterprises are starting to get into venture building. So either
Yes.
they would either invest in new startups, or they would collaborate
Mm.
with startups, or build their own startup, some kind of spin-off, because they want
Yep.
to explore AI. So the problem with the enterprise, I'm sure you know this as well, that they really interested in AI, but
Mm.
they see it as a very risky technology because of all of the issues
Mm.
that we literally talked about. Like, all of the points that we
Yep.
discussed is at the back of their minds. So they
Mm.
try to be really, really careful. So I think For startups, the opportunity for them is that they can absolutely work with enterprises. You just have to have a good pitch, but also you have to
Yeah,
show that that you are serious about your ethics. You're serious about their data, because if they see any sort of loophole that would compromise their data, they're just going to walk away. So it's like you said, it's the data.
yeah, and I've seen some great deals in the music tech space for this kind of venture
Interesting.
building arrangement. Yeah, I mean, who knows why?
Yeah, I
My
didn't know
client,
that.
my clients in music just sort of better at cutting these deals. Is music just more open to it? Really great deals where they've said, look, music as an industry needs a small number of sort of dominant incumbents to move to adopt new technology. So if we're going to build that new technology that the industry really needs, we've got to find a partner who is willing to go with us. So people have done really innovative deals in which cash-rich incumbents looking for a competitive advantage have effectively loaned them the money to fund the development and have said, look, we love it. We want to be involved every step of the way. And when you get there and start making money, you'll just pay that loan back and we'll get the best possible price in the industry. And nobody ever gets a better price because for them, it's a nice low risk way of putting money into software development. You don't need to have your own team. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's someone else's baby. They loan you the money for the development now. There's milestones to make sure that you're doing what you said you were going to do. And then at the end of the day, if your product is the latest, greatest big winner, well, then they adopt it, they become your first customer, and they get the best rate for all time. And they know that when the industry moves to that particular product, that their competitors have got a higher cost base and can't possibly undercut them on what will now be mission critical software. So those deals are available for anybody in any sector developing software. And I think particularly with AI, where there is just huge demand and huge appetite from incumbents of all kinds to adopt AI in the industry as part of their workflow.
Yeah. And the one thing I would say, just as a quick reminder, personally, that in my opinion,
Yep.
avoid fine tuning any existing models. Don't do that.
Mhm.
If you can, I mean, the thing that we're doing, that we created a micro model, like I said earlier, where we say, you know what, GPT, for example, or Claude, is just there as an engine that basically generates that conversational experience. But we're not going anywhere near it with your data. We're not fine tuning it. We're not training it. We're
Mhm.
simply keeping it as is, right? Fully guardrailed, etc. But then we use our algorithms where we can then train the model externally, so that if a company decides to change the language model, right? Because some people might say, you know what, I don't want to use GPT anymore. I want to use Claude. Cool. We didn't train that GPT with your data. We can just switch. That's why we say, like, in our case, now we're LLM independent, but you can
Mhm.
still achieve. It is something called, although it's a bit experimental, it's a parameter efficient tuning. So effectively, you instead of fine tuning an entire model, you create a fine tuned micro model that works with a
Mhm.
massive language model, but then you can switch the model, and
Mhm.
that you keep the safety of the data. Um,
Yes.
but because I know a lot of companies, again, if you say anything like, "Oh yeah, we're going to fine tune GPT with your data,"
Mhm.
ooh, no, don't do
Yeah.
that.
But
OpenAI
right,
would want you to do it, but no, don't do that.
that transferability is interesting because it's early days for the industry. We don't know how it will work.
Mm.
Will this be a lot like hosting where there is the ability to transfer
Simply
from
just transfer one place
platform
to
to
another. Yeah, yeah.
right? We saw it a lot in e-commerce. The movement to models where you could take the entire storefront and slot it onto a new e-commerce stack.
Mm,
And I appreciate that an AI is a sort of far bigger investment than that,
mm.
but it wouldn't surprise me if that sort of socketable model ended up being the norm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's definitely a rising movement towards smaller language models now, rather than large
Mhm.
language models. We see that a lot in science, especially. So, and in open source. So
Mhm.
basically, because the thing is, the argument, and I'm a big supporter of this, but the argument I always like to make is like, why do you need something like GPT in science?
Mhm.
Whereby, for example, you've got the same language model that might help you decode animal genomes, say, but then the same language model can give you the best recipe of fried chicken. I mean, why would you want that in a lab? You do not want that in a lab.
Yeah.
But you are paying for it. You're paying for the
Mhm.
hosting costs, you're paying for the compute and everything. But what makes more sense is for you to have a language model, a smaller language model, much, much smaller, that's
Yeah.
specialized in the field, in genetics, for example, and then you use it within that
Yeah.
particular application. So that and it's more manageable. And actually, again, studies are showing that it's reducing the level of hallucinations. Again, doesn't eliminate it. Does not eliminate it. Just for people that are listening,
Yeah.
but it absolutely reduces it significantly because you're not, you're reducing the noise that could potentially distract the AI model, as it were.
Yes, right. The risk of that internal confusion. Yes.
Absolutely. So yeah, no, there's definitely a rising interest, and especially in the open source community of smaller language models. I personally think that would be the future. I think, to be honest with you, I think, do you know Gary Marcus, one of the biggest critics of AI?
Yes.
I mean, he's very much anti LLM, I would say. I mean, he's like he's calling it out. I mean, he calls out the bullshit that the AI startup CEOs like to come up with about LLM is basically the future of AI, and obviously it's not. It's just one element of AI. And I think there's another thing that people need to understand, because the problem right now, I think, when people talk about AI, they just think LLMs. But LLMs is just one element of AI. The world of AI is massive. You can do some amazing AI stuff without going anywhere near LLMs. I think people kind of need to understand that.
All the way back to the start of this conversation, so things that we're doing at SMB to trial AI products, they're not all generative. And some of the most impressive things I've seen have got no generative element to them at all, and are just there purely to do sifting and sorting. And this document looks 99% like that document, which looks 98% like that document. So cluster them together. And those are some amazing tools that are saving hundreds of hours of lawyer time, no generative element to it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the value. And I think that's what Gary Marcus is calling out, because he's like, on LinkedIn, he's chatting and screaming, "Oh, this LLM thing is so stupid, yada, yada, yada."
Yeah, but it was huge because you can show your mum an LLM and she understands what it is, right?
Well, it's the first.
It's hard to get excited about all the other stuff because there's no obvious, hey, check this out. I kind of knew that we'd got to peak LLM hype when I was speaking to, what is she to me? So my sister's mother-in-law, at
Right.
a family
Okay.
barbecue, was like, what is this AI thing, Raoul? You're in, and I was like, no, I'll just show you. I'll make it on my phone.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was like, this is probably peak hype when I'm having that conversation.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, I think because it's the first time in history, I would say, of AI that the general public has direct interaction with AI. Because up to that point, like I said, we've had AI AI has been around for 70 years, if you think about it. But it was always at the back end. It was something that you just don't see as an end user or as a consumer. You don't see the AI. But I mean, I try to remind people, like, all the photo filtering that you've been doing for the past how many years now on social media, that's all AI. But the fact that you're not interacting with it, like you're not talking to it, people don't think of it as AI. So AI has always been there. It's been part of your life. It's been part of every element of your life that you can think of. There was AI in it. But LLMs, I think it's the first product or technology that allows the end user, the average Joe, to actually directly interact with an AI model.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, I think we are, like I say, we are living in a real hype wave of the technology. I'm sure that in 5 years, 10 years time, we won't be talking about AI. We'll be back to just talking about software again.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I can't remember if I kind of called this out a few months ago, where I said that I don't believe most of these big LLM companies will exist by the end of this year. I mean, we've already seen two big names like Inflection basically disappeared. Well, they're still active, but the hype behind it was big. But Microsoft decided to absorb all of their management team, so it's just, I don't know, it's a skeleton of Inflection that's doing something. Character AI, more recently, same thing happened, and these are massive names. They had, I don't know how many billions of dollars worth of investment. So these are big names, and I'm just wondering, when will we see the day that perhaps Microsoft will move in again into OpenAI? Will say, you know what, we can't monetize this, because the problem, the biggest problem actually in the commercial world of AI is the ROI. And I think you alluded to that, like at the beginning, that the LLM for you is kind of a nice to have, not a need to have.
Yes.
And that is a problem. Like, is it justifiable? And I speak to CFOs a lot. They always say, they love the tech. So cool. Can they justify the investment in something that is nice to have, that will not generate any kind of significant ROI, that, that just makes it any kind of useful or kind of logical
Yep.
business investment. That is a
Well,
problem.
but that's a change in the institutional conversation. So I think at the end of last year, people were just doing AI. It was happening. There was working groups who were figuring out how we were going to adopt it. Everyone was just doing it because it was just assumed that that was the way the world was going
Mm.
and that there was going to be an ROI on it. This year, when I talk to corporates who are sort of adopters rather than developers, it's all ROI focused. Does it make money though, or is it just cool? Um, so you're right. We are back to thinking about AI as a sort of almost vanilla software procurement, in which we're asking ourselves, is this an outsourcing exercise that makes sense financially?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's a message to startups. We talked about startups earlier. I mean, you've got to
Yep.
think about the ROI, and in fact, I
Mm,
had my last guest, Henry Nash, he's a serial tech entrepreneur since the 80s. So
mm,
he knows the game very well, and he actually works for IBM now through acquisition. They acquired his last
yes.
company. So obviously IBM, they've been very active with AI for a long time, way before even OpenAI,
Mm,
with Watson and so on. Um,
yep.
and he said, like, sort of his core message was that it's all somebody has to pay for the ROI. So,
Mm,
and that's why when I see the big VCs, and there was one video that went a little bit viral on LinkedIn recently with Eric Schmidt, where he was talking about his future. He envisages the future where every single human, notice that every single
mm,
human on this planet will have the ability to build AI agents that can build endless, the word he used, I think, endless
yep.
supply of software and apps, stuff like that. And I mean, thank goodness there are a lot of other people, not just me, that call this out. It's like, what the hell
Yeah.
are you talking about? Firstly, if you're talking about every single human, are you talking about the poor people in the slums of Asia, for example?
Yeah.
Are
I
they
mean, they
going
all
to
have
have
to get a
access?
phone first to start with. Let's be
Exactly.
honest.
For instance, let's assume people like him, the billionaires, are they going to
Mm.
eradicate poverty and give them free phones and free compute and free
Well,
microchips? But
I mean, I remember the blockchain hype. It was going to solve the refugee crisis at
oh
one
yeah,
point, and so
absolutely.
so I think this is just AI. It's the next messiah. This is tech. We come in these messianic waves.
But it's crazy because he is a smart guy. I'm not, I kind of pulling him out, but it sounds to me like the way from my experience, like I know that we are reaching the end of the hype when you
Mhm.
start seeing people who are very smart, like him, like Eric Schmidt,
Yeah.
and the big VCs and big
Yeah.
CEOs, starting to talk and sound like tech bros that know
Yeah,
nothing.
when the bubble has to pop eventually, and this is probably a sign that it's reaching breaking point.
It's desperation. It's desperation.
Mm,
I actually called it again. I called this out. I think probably in April, where because I started to see signs of that, and I thought, wow, surely the bubble is not popping already. I mean, because
mm,
I always thought it would be at the end of this year, and I think the key player here, the reason why I believe it's going to pop, it's Apple, because Apple
okay.
are still they've announced the Apple Intelligence, obviously cheeky.
Mm,
Their AI is Apple Intelligence, not artificial intelligence, but but for me, the way I see it, going back to the point I made earlier, that it's the smaller models that make more sense. But the other issue, of course, that people worry about is privacy. And the
yes.
best way to keep your data private with AI is to have it on device. And the only company that can do that really well is Apple. Samsung, to some extent, and they're kind of doing it
Mhm.
already. But the fact that Apple, they pretty much closed their ecosystem even more. So they've got their own microchips, their own operating system, pretty much their
Yep.
own everything. So they are in a position to offer
Yeah.
what I see as the ultimate AI. And I'm not saying this
Yes.
as a fan or anything. It's just like,
Yeah.
from
Well,
what's
is
out
it
there.
is it privacy or is it a walled garden? It's the Apple question.
That's the legal question. Like actually, since you brought it up, what is it? Is it an Apple Garden, or is it a true privacy setup?
Maybe both. Look, look. Full disclosure: I'm not an Apple user. Never have been. People, family
What?
members, they give me their iPhones. They hear, "Oh, can you make it do anything?" I'm like, no, no, I don't know how to work this. I've Android all the way through. The thing for me about Apple is it builds its value by being a premium price vendor of technology. Once upon a time, that's because it was premium innovative tech.
Mm.
These days, the gap between the latest greatest Apple and the latest greatest sort of Samsung, Huawei device, even Microsoft devices, you struggle to see it. So Apple has to find something to justify the price point with.
Mm.
The price point is justified by the walled garden of Apple software. Everything works. So the minute that that opens up, people go, oh, hang on, if I can start getting Apple stuff on other devices, if there is that level of interoperability, then how is Apple justifying the price? Why must I go to Apple? And Apple has discovered that in a world in which its competitors are repeatedly lambasted for privacy breaches, and I'm talking about Meta and Google,
Yep.
that actually privacy is this really great sales point. So the answer is that, yeah, it's privacy, but let's be cynical about it. It's not for your benefit. It's for the benefit of keeping Apple prices premium.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, they're using the same sort of. It's back in the day when they were competing with Microsoft. Basically,
Mhm.
the argument was like that Microsoft was getting all these endless viruses and hacks, whatever, that would never happen to
Yep.
Apple, which is
Mhm.
kind of true. I've been using Apple pretty much very, very long
Yep.
time. So yeah, I had a lot. I mean, to be fair, I like the way, I can't call myself a tech person if I haven't tried the other tech. I've tried Android.
Mhm.
I pretty much tried everything. And for me, I use Apple mainly for three reasons. Like I started before because indeed I had a lot less viruses and issues like
Yep.
that Microsoft was just suffering with. The privacy, like you said, I agree with you. Actually, it is more of a clever move. Basically, they're saying,
Mhm.
oh, like you said, Meta, Google, they've been attacked and lambasted legally for privacy issues, and rightly so. So they reacted to it, and I think they're doing a good job for the corporate,
Mhm.
for a corporate, size of Apple. The fact that they're doing, uh, whether honestly or not, they are putting
Yep.
privacy at the top of their priority, which
Yep.
is good. And I saw
Oh, it's real. It's not
it's
altruistic.
real, exactly, absolutely, absolutely, and that's why I was quite, and I kind of did a review about their announcement of Apple Intelligence, because for me, I wanted to see, well,
Mhm.
how are you keeping that security? How are you going to make it work on device? And actually, I think they did it. I mean, again, we have to see it in action properly. I mean, there's a
Mhm.
lot of beta testing and stuff, but I think once it's out there, I think that's when we can truly test it. But definitely, from the things that they were saying, they're saying the right things. But I think, and if the consumer market absolutely adopts it properly, and they say, you know what, this is amazing, I think that would be probably the end of OpenAI as we know it. I mean, I don't think it will be the end of the company. I think it's not going to operate as it does right now, because even though they are making a lot of money, but it is a loss-making business. I mean, they're losing
Yeah.
billions. Um, and also, there were
Interesting.
rumors.
I thought the threat was at the other end, but we'll get there.
Well, because the other rumor, the main reason I started to think like that, not just because of Apple, but there are rumors emerging that Microsoft developing their own language model,
Mhm.
which is kind of like GPT, which is kind of bizarre. Well, if they've
Mhm.
invested so much into OpenAI and GPT, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of theories where people go on about, well, maybe because Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, been annoyed with OpenAI since the drama that they had last year,
Yep.
and they still seem to be having dramas now. I mean, I think there are two co-founders left as well.
Yep.
So it's like
Right.
there's
But
drama, there's a bit of instability, and going back to the ROI side, I
Mhm.
think Microsoft are thinking, well, okay, what's our ROI? Because they're not making enough money
Mhm.
like that satisfies their shareholders, and perhaps they figured out, well, actually, no, if we build our own model and we're not
Mhm.
reliant on OpenAI, yeah. So for me, the
Yep.
future is unclear for OpenAI, and then of course there's Anthropic. Again, Anthropic, I'm not sure. They're kind of playing a little bit of catch up, although their model is actually really, really good. I mean, some argue it's even better than GPT. In my opinion, they're more or less the same. But again, they focus a lot on the privacy side. They kind of
Mhm.
learned the lessons from OpenAI, I think. But again, it's that ROI side. It's like, who's going to be paying for this, and to what
Mhm.
extent can they, continue burning cash, because they are burning cash. There will be a
Mhm.
point that something has to happen. Either they get acquired and they become a subsidiary like DeepMind with Google. Um,
Mhm.
so Anthropic will be, just a department within maybe Amazon or somebody else. I don't know. And OpenAI might be the same. They become, a sub department of Microsoft.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I think there'll be a major change like that. And not to
That I
mention, of
could
course,
see.
sorry, I was like one last point, of course, and the issue with open source. I mean, what
Mhm.
Meta did with Llama. I mean,
Yep.
I made that point in the last video as well. That I think that's a nail in the coffin, because basically, if you've got a free
Yep.
model that can do what GPT does, why would you pay for it then? Why would you want
Yep.
to pay
Well,
for it?
that's sort of what I meant when I say I think the threats from the other end. It's not necessarily from a sort of an innovative way of delivering AI and
Yeah.
putting AI onto devices for privacy.
Yeah.
The real threat for large commercial model makers is that Meta is about as large as it can get and is releasing, as you say, a free model that anybody can go and run locally that will deliver results which, for all the world, are as good as ChatGPT results. So why would you pay money? The sort of AWS business model,
Yeah.
in which people are going to sort of rent AI thinking power from you, is less and less promising. If you can't get a cigarette paper of difference between you and Llama, there has to be a reason that people pay you, as opposed to getting 95, 99% of you for free. Yeah, I don't see it, but I can see the ROI for Microsoft. I absolutely understand why Microsoft is putting the money into OpenAI and why they would be delighted to fold it in eventually, given how easily it appeared that they could poach all the personnel when things got hairy.
Yeah.
I can absolutely see that, because for Microsoft, the obvious commercial advantage is that it lets them absolutely choke down on any innovative ideas that might compete with Office, right? We see so many. You need only look at things like Zoom and, to a degree, Canva, which are just immediately replicated and rivaled within Microsoft Office. So Microsoft absolutely needs to have AI it can call on that is great to squash innovative businesses that say, well, hang on, what if there's this generic functionality that anyone in a professional environment might use that they then need to import into Microsoft in a hurry? That, for Microsoft, justifies squillions that they're paying in development, so long as they have that as a reliable option.
So you're saying that OpenAI potential will become like Zoom, because Zoom is still alive somehow. I don't know how.
DeepMind is the yeah. Well, that's it. But like DeepMind is the good example of it.
Yeah.
You would fold in, and we will have an all singing, all dancing, best in the market AI here in Microsoft that is ours forever, or at least ours at the best rate possible, so that any competitor to that cash cow money printing Microsoft Office suite is immediately stifled in the crib, so that business doesn't move from Office to whatever that is.
And that actually, see, because you mentioned Canva, reminded me
Yep.
of the issue we had with Adobe recently. You probably heard about that, because Adobe. I mean, I was actually, because we use Adobe products a lot for the design side of things, and I think, I mean, I think I probably said it like months ago, probably last year, that the way Adobe deployed AI within their products, it's how you're supposed to deploy AI, in the sense
Yep.
that the idea that you have this separate chat thing like Chat GPT, that it's just a standalone product. I was like, yeah, but okay, you can use it occasionally, but then that's it. What else do you do with that? Whereas AI has always been, for the past 17 years, 70 years rather, and the AI bros tend to get annoyed when I say this, but it's true, that it's always been an accessory. It's a very powerful accessory, and despite everything that
Yep.
we talked about, how dangerous it could be, etc., it's just an accessory. We've never been in a situation where we're
Yep.
building an entire, operating system on AI and so on. But the thing
Yep.
is, what Adobe did is that they enhanced their products, like Photoshop, for example. It has generative AI in it, and it's fantastic, right? And it's
Right.
they say it's built on their own images, so the copyright side is kind of protected, whatever. But the question I was coming to is, it's basically, what does that do with the privacy side? Because Adobe recently, they were caught basically saying that whatever design you create or any content that you generate on Adobe, they have the right to use it to train their AI, and that absolutely peed off a lot of designers. That they switched. I think they were probably switched to Canva or somebody else.
Yep.
So what's happening with that? Because I wonder if Microsoft and all of the other companies that now basically have generative AI in them, they've all changed their terms and conditions. Google changed their terms and conditions as well, and privacy policies. Have you?
Oh, it's been standard practice for so long
Yeah.
with SaaS services that it's not new. It just says AI on the tin. The idea that you can use data that was generated by a user and processed potentially by a SaaS provider for your own development purposes in the future, that's
For
been a standard
personalization,
feature.
they used to say, at least for personalization.
Yeah, but it's always been a free license for development.
Yeah.
So I remember when people were sort of outraged that they found this in, was it Zoom? They found this in, or Teams? I forget
Yes.
which one it was. And someone, well, hang on a second, well, the
Slack.
competitor's been saying that for years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right? They've all been saying this for years. This is you've only just noticed. So the idea that big tech can use your data to develop more tech is not particularly remarkable. The the only remarkable thing about it is where they try to give themselves a license to use copyrighted material.
Right. This is the
If
idea that it's
and again,
your
yeah,
creation, and use
right,
it to train their AI model.
right. You've essentially given me a license to use because that's always been an anathema to the
Mm,
creative sector. So photographers, artists, whatever. The idea was that this is a work of your own artistic creation. And the joy of that is that you get a monopoly on it. You make your money by having a monopoly on that art. The idea that you might then be licensing that back for reuse and reprocessing by someone else, that's why that's so offensive, as opposed to just all the sort of vanilla we
mm.
never really noticed. I can train my AI on the outputs of your sort of generic phone calls.
But that's new, though, isn't it? The idea
Mm.
that you're
Yeah,
giving us the license to your content, which is very
yeah,
different, isn't
totally.
it? Yeah.
Yeah, right. And that's why it's so offensive, because it is a very new idea that having created what is supposedly a unique and new work, that I
Mm.
then owe you a license. And I know the counterpoint to that is, well, is it a unique new work if you've used a series of generic images from the Adobe library and a computer editing tool did half of the editing for you rather than you jumping the pixels around individually?
Mm. So
And, and my feeling is, yes, it's an original work. I'm just using really good tools.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. But so how many other companies do this? Because obviously Adobe is the one that being caught, Zoom,
Mm.
Slack, but I mean, I'm
Oh,
sure they're not the
it's
only ones.
ubiquitous. But the thing about Adobe is the context, and that it was all about licensing images back,
Right.
as opposed to just saying more waftingly, we'll use data created as part of this service to train models or to develop with in the future. So that's why Adobe is sort of new and interesting, because it's this claim on artistic creations rather than just usage data and content of usage that goes through a system.
Didn't Instagram do the same thing as well?
Mm.
They said that they wanted to train their
Yeah.
models or Meta AI using your photos.
Yeah,
Whether
yeah,
you're an
almost
artist or
that.
not.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's interesting. It goes back to what we were saying about the open web earlier, which is to say, well, the web is not just a sort of free-form democracy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a small number of incumbents, Google, Meta, that own huge, great portions of the public square. And your license terms for entering there is that they will then use your content to develop. So, can I point an AI at the web and create YouTube? Almost certainly not. That's going to make my company really difficult from an investor point of view.
Mm,
Can YouTube scrape YouTube for data on YouTube to train its AIs? You bet it can.
mm. Oh, wow. Wow. So you must be very busy, right? I can only imagine from everything I've talked about.
Yeah, it's interesting. So our big asks at the moment from AI, from AI, we essentially there are two questions. One is data and privacy. So it tends to be a question from corporates who say, look, I've got a bucket of data about customers, staff, prospect. I really, really, really want to use an AI on that data. Can I do it? That's question number one. And then the other is the developer question, which is, I'm just sure I can solve a pain point in this industry. All I need to do is ingest the following mountain of data. Can I do it? And those two questions are absolute perennials at the moment from adopters and vendors. And yes, it's a busy time of life.
Yeah. So what do you think? Because everything, because we've covered so many topics. It's almost 2 hours already. um,
Of course, yeah.
so what do you think is the future? What does it look like in your mind? I mean, because obviously it seems that to me we have to kind of screw things up quite a lot legally, politically,
Mhm,
economically. It's like we have to have multiple crashes until I think the whole world potentially says, you know what,
mhm,
we need to kind of get our act together, realign, and do something.
mhm.
I mean, that's my hopium. What do you
Yes.
think is your what's your sort of prediction potentially? What would AI look like in the next say 5 years? from the
I mean,
legal perspective, etc.
I'm a huge pessimist about this. I'm a huge pessimist. So look,
Oh, wow.
it's not a novel observation, but I do worry about the future of work. There are a lot of jobs that will be entry level jobs or sort of medium skill jobs that AI is tasked with doing. AI agents that will lead to redundancies, and that's not a novel observation. I know that. I suppose the bit that I'd add on to that, which is maybe less common, but I'm sure not unique, is that we will, as a society, accept lower standards. We will absolutely go through a period in which things that used to be done by people are done faster and cheaper,
Mm,
but slightly worse by AI. And we will find that deeply frustrating, along with people who suddenly wonder what they're going to do as part of the workforce. There'll be a huge amount of public anger about it. People will regulate to try and put humans back into the workforce. And we will eventually go through a wave, as we did with offshore outsourcing,
oh, wow.
in which people go, hang on, you've you've delivered a service to me electronically at a very low cost, but it's worse and I hate it, and I'm
Mm,
sick of talking to a robot. I know it's a robot now,
mm,
and that's why I keep having these frustrating call experiences. It's not as good. Give me a human who can make decisions rather than just haggling or trying to play within the rules of an established framework. So I think the future is more redundancy, lower standards, possibly lower costs, but maybe just higher profits, and that we will eventually say, no, no, we have taxed too far to this, and I want to bring back humans.
mm. So, are we going to see a world that is filled with UBI, universal basic
No,
income?
no, but good lord, there's another 2 hours. Absolutely, no, we're not.
So that's a
I,
problem,
I,
isn't it?
I,
Because how will these people survive? That's the issue, isn't
it's,
it?
I mean, and again, God, we're about to fill another 2 hour slot of it. It it is a problem that people will be rendered workless by AI and will need to reskill. And these might be people who will struggle to skill into the kind of roles that exist and are in demand. So there'll be a lot of redundancy and reskilling, but it almost assumes that UBI is not a problem in and of itself.
Mm,
Um, I'm yet to be convinced economically that UBI isn't a sort of vicious circle of inflation that rapidly renders UBI worthless and requires UBI to go up year on year.
mm,
And then you look and go, well, hang on, who's going to pay for the UBI? Because as we've just said, the majority of this innovation, a lot of these systems, they're American.
yeah,
I'm not going to be able to call up California and ask for a contribution to the UBI budget, which goes up every year.
and they
I
wouldn't
don't
care.
see
They
it
say
as a
it's not our
workable solution.
country. Yeah,
Yeah, right. What have I got to do with it?
yeah, yeah. Well, that's a pessimistic view. I can't disagree.
Sorry, I didn't.
No, no,
No,
no.
well, this is it. I
It's
wish I could tell you it was a utopia, which we would all make software
mm,
individually on our phones. I don't think we will, and I think that if we did all make software on our phones, it'd be an absolute nightmare, complete havoc.
yeah. No, I agree, and no, I actually agree with you because that's the thing that I did in my other video. Like why I feel,
Yeah.
I mentioned this earlier that I think that we are moving towards dystopia actually because
Mm,
we are going to see more unemployment. I believe we are going to
mm,
see lower standards as well. Kind of like what we've seen with mass manufacturing, right? So
mm,
crappier products, but we're still paying the premium. So we're not. It's not cheaper. So we were told decades ago that if we have mass produced products, it's cheaper. Well, now it's not, right? Kind of like we're seeing even something like Netflix, for instance. Like the whole
mm,
point of having subscription models that you don't have to worry about ads, you get quality content. Well, actually, we're getting worse content. It costs more, and we're getting ads. So we're
mhm.
not actually getting good value for money. In fact, and I
Oh,
think
there we go.
I think I did say in the other video that actually I think AI is going to accelerate that, and AI is going to be yet another tool for the big
Hmm.
corporations basically to maximize profit. And for them,
Yep.
they will replace workers not because AI necessarily is as good as their works, because it's cheaper. They don't
Yep.
get.
Well, I mean, get me started on AI and advertising. There are some amazing things people are doing to insert advertisement and product placement into legacy content using AI, which staggers me how good it is and how seamless it is.
Yeah, yeah. Oh dear. Oh well.
Yeah.
So well, on that note, I suppose like pessimistic notes.
Doom laden note.
Well, I suppose we'll have to chat again probably in a few months to see like has it happened? Were we right or wrong? But I think definitely, yeah, the end of this year is going to be an interesting thing to watch. I mean, do you think the bubble will survive until the end
No,
of this year?
no,
Yeah,
surely not. I can't believe it. There absolutely is an investment bubble about to pop with
yeah.
AI. I am sure that we'll be back in just a few years to just calling it software again.
And what do you think is the next big thing? Because obviously you deal with a lot of investors. So what's on their radar for 2025 and beyond?
Oh,
The next hype.
it's a difficult thing because there's an obvious answer to that, and you've already said it during this session, which is quantum computing.
Yep.
The problem is that was going to be the next thing when people were talking about blockchain. So everybody expects quantum to be the next big thing, and I'd be a fool not to join them. But at the same time, they also thought that quantum was going to be the next big thing last time and the
Yeah.
time before that. So it awaits its day in the sun as the next big hype.
Yeah, it's still quite experimental, but it's yeah. I think I agree. I think that will be the next hype. That's for sure. Especially, I suppose mainly because, and I think the world is seeing that China, they're throwing a lot of money at it right now. So certainly, I can't see Europe and America sitting by and saying, "Oh, we're not going to do the same." I think they will do the same. They will have to. So
No, I agree.
cool. Well, Raoul, again, thank you so much, man. Always a pleasure chatting with you. I think. Well, if people contact you directly if they need any help, because we do have quite a few tech startups that are listening to this podcast. I mean, are you okay for them
Yep,
to get in touch with you?
please do. You can find me online. So just put me into your search engine of choice, and you'll find me without difficulty. There is not many people with this name.
But just in case, we're still going to put links, your
There you
LinkedIn
go.
profile and everything in the description. So if anybody wants, have any questions, as you can see, Raoul knows his stuff. Like I said, there's a reason why I asked him to help us with Nebulae as well. So yeah, he's definitely one of the best out there. So Raoul, my man, thanks
You're
so
very
much.
kind. Oh, well, look, thanks for having me.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. We've covered quite a lot of topics. I told you, Raoul is the best. He's really, really good at this stuff. And yes, so many unknowns, right? I mean, my goodness, where do we go from here? I think, generally speaking, of course, as the whole election cycle around the world ends in 2024, because as you probably remember, I did talk about this in my previous videos, but it's been all over the news that 2024 has had the largest number of elections in human history. So basically, we're seeing loads of new governments being elected or existing governments being re-elected. So I think, once the dust starts to settle politically toward probably the end of 2024, early first quarter of 2025, let's say, I think, that will be the point where we need to start seeing political leaders basically putting their head together and understand how to deal with this whole AI growth situation and how to regulate the corporates behind them and of course the VCs behind them accordingly. Because right now it is, yes, the EU, the UK, for example, we're kind of starting to move in the right direction, I think, although it's still a little bit up in the air in my opinion. It's not, it's not good enough. Make sure you share this with as many people as you can, because of course the copyright situation impacts all of us, because we live in the world of social media and everybody's uploading something online, and it is your right to own it. The fact that it's free, it does not mean that you don't own it. And we are seeing companies these days where they try to somewhat power grab your content, right? I mean, we've seen this in situation with Adobe, for example. Effectively, it's trying to convince people to say, oh, yeah, part of our quote unquote privacy policy, we basically have the right to take your content. Excuse me? No, you don't. Who the hell are you to tell us to do that? I mean, it's like, the nonsense that some VCs, the ones that I featured, in fact, in my previous AI dystopia video, where they were talking about that we shouldn't be focusing too much on protecting copyright because we need to think about the future of the AI startups. I mean, what about them? Think about the AI startups. I mean, really? So stealing is the solution to make the world a better place. Is it really? I mean, come on. So yeah, I don't think we're going to solve this mess anytime soon, but certainly we need to have this conversation as regular as we possibly can. More importantly, you guys, all of us, as well as users and customers of a lot of these companies, we need to scrutinize. We absolutely must push companies to protect our right when it comes to our privacy, when it comes to our ownership of whatever content that we put online. It is our right to protect it because it's ours. So I think that's really the key message here. Make sure you
you've got that right. Use your legal right to push companies to respect your rights. And I'm afraid, if somebody like Trump and the supporters of Project 2025 become president, yeah, that's not going to look good. So do I think that Kamala Harris as president will make things better? I actually don't know. I'm not saying that because I don't know. It could be the same situation that we see right now under Biden's administration, and she's part of Biden's administration. Certainly his administration is more focused on consumer rights, perhaps, than previous administrations. But arguably, is it enough? Not really. We need more. So will Kamala Harris do more? I don't know. I mean, I can't answer that question. But certainly, I can assure you, she will not drag us into the rabbit hole of Project 2025 or anything similar to Project 2025. I mean, God forbid, I do not want to see that. To be honest with you guys, after what we've seen in the world of politics in the UK and indeed in the US under Trump's administration in the past 10 years, my God, I'm not ruling it out. I think, my general philosophy in life is better to be safe than sorry. So fingers crossed. Let's see how this goes. So anyway, I don't think there's anything else for me to add. I think, as I said, Raoul covered everything beautifully. And thank you guys. Again, all of your support really makes a huge difference. So all you've got to do, subscribe, like, share, the usual stuff. Help the brother out. I want to have the freedom to have whatever conversations that needs to be had with whoever that I want without any kind of control from somebody at the top. Nuh-uh. Ain't gonna happen. This is independent medium and it exists thanks to you. So much love. I'll speak to you very, very soon. Peace.